Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. For those of you that followed the newsletter last year, for which I interviewed 120 people around this question, the objective remains very much the same. I'm trying to provide you with tools and content that help you find and define your own answer to this question, while I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be genuine expressions of the human experience. On the 6th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm joined by Paul Gleeson. In his lifetime, Paul has cycled across Australia, rowed a boat across the Atlantic Ocean, rowed across the Northwest Passage in Canada, taken part in an expedition to the Arctic, and has also, as recently as last year, led an expedition of coaching clients up to the summit of Mount Blanc. Paul has also written a book, Crossing the Swell, about his experiences of rowing across the Atlantic. And what's more, he's a dear friend of mine who I consider to be one of the most enthusiastic and inspiring people I know. In this episode, we talk about what Paul has learned from these various expeditions, including finishing his cycle across Australia with a broken limb, fearing for his life and his safety while rowing across the Atlantic, while reflecting on what he learned about himself, what he learned about his own mind, and how it shaped his views on performance and living a very full life. Paul is also currently writing a book about building an expedition mindset. So we also talk about some practical tips and ideas around building your own expedition mindset and trying to get as much out of life as one can. I really enjoyed this conversation with Paul. As ever, I learn a lot when I speak with Paul, and I'm sure you will too. And if you enjoy this interview, please like, share, and subscribe, as I greatly appreciate any support at this stage in my podcast journey. So without further ado, the 6th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Hey, Paul, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm good. How are you?
You're very well, thank you. For those of you that are listening, Paul must be one of the most enthusiastic or inspiring or infectiously inspiring people I know. So I was delighted to get Paul to join us on the podcast today. Paul, the first question I have for you is, when did you first notice this kind of call to adventure or expedition first in your life?
It's a good question. I suspect it was always there. When I think I was 4, and I took the stabilizers off my bike and I went down our house at home, my folks' house. It's on a bit of a hill. When you're 4, it's a massive hill. And I took the stabilizers off, and I can vividly remember going around the corner. It's sort of looped like a sort of banana shaped, and the bike started rattling. I was losing control and sort of woke up. I was on the ground, and I don't really remember being carried home, but I all cuts, and I hadn't broken my nose, but I ended up getting stitches sort of underneath my nose, and a neighbour carried me up all bleeding. And the next day, it was my sister's first communion. And any of the pictures, I'm not in many of those pictures, but any of them that I am in, I look like a beaten child. So I guess maybe there was that little bit of adventurous spirit in me from a young age. But I suppose, like lots of my friends and peers, and like lots of people maybe listening to this who can probably identify with this, I grew up playing lots of different sports, and I suspect that was an outlet for that adventurous spirit, in terms of an expression of it. It was when I was in college in Limerick. So I'm from Limerick, and I was studying in UL, and I read a book about Tom Crean, the infamous or famous Irish polar explorer. So back in the day when the likes of Amundsen and Scott were trying to become the first to reach the South Pole, Tom Crean from Auniscall in Kerry in Ireland was in the middle of all that, and was on lots of those teams. Incredible human being. But there was a book written about him called An Unsung Hero. And I remember reading that. I think I was 19 or 20. And I was reading it at home on the kitchen table, and Mom was doing stuff around me. And I just got this idea of, I want to cycle from Limerick to Dublin. And it was just after exams, I think. And we were going up to Dublin to meet a few friends for a night in the beer. And I said, look, I'm going to cycle up and see you up there. And it's about 200 kilometers, just shy of 200 kilometers. And I just went on my regular bike. I didn't really plan it because some of the roads, it was before the motorways that are in existence now, but some of the roads you still weren't allowed to cycle on it. So I just I adopted that. I'll ask for forgiveness versus permission approach and just went for it. And I remember cycling into Dublin. I don't know, it'd take me 10 hours, or I'm not sure exactly how long. It took me a while anyway. But I remember cycling in, tired, hungry, my arse was sore, but just delighted. And I was like, oh, that was great, and had a great night. But then I sort of packed that away and didn't really think anything of it. But I think that was the first, even though I didn't realize that at the time, I think that was a little bit of the beginning of the conscious awareness of the expression of this adventurous streak.
It's I don't know. I've got an idea at the moment these days where I think we're and I'm talking about a certain maybe socioeconomic class where we're almost like too comfortable, like we've moved too far away from kind of. I'm not saying I want to go back to a hunter gatherer lifestyle or something, but just there's some call to adventure in this that I think that if we're not engaged with or connected with in some way, I think our lives are suffering, even though on the surface they look very nice and very well put together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've said this for years. I think I know it's a massive generalization, as a generation, people, I'm 46. If I think I look around and I see how we as a collective live, I think we're absolutely gone really soft. Things are really convenient. Things are a lot easier in so many instances, which, look, is great. I'm the benefactor of some of that as well. But I do think that when you introduce a little bit of discomfort, whether it's physical, whether it's through being out in nature, whether it's, learning a new instrument, whatever it might be, if you introduce a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of unknown around something that you want to do, of course, to me, in my experience, it does build up your what I would call your mental fitness and agility, which is different from mental health, and we might get into that at some point. But even if I take this morning, for me, I train with a couple of guys a few mornings a week, and we go swimming in the sea afterwards. I say swimming like it's at this point in February, it's a 5-minute dip, but I've been doing this not quite every day, but I'd say out of 7 days, probably on average about 5 days a week. And I nearly feel like I miss it if I don't do it. But there was only 2 of us in swimming this morning. And I remember saying it to my mate who was in with me. I said at the start, I started doing this last September. So only a couple of months doing it since we moved down here to Kinsale, because in some respects, I've no excuse because I'm a minute walk, from the water where I am right now. Yeah. But I was saying it to my mate that at the start of doing this, so I do it with the guys 3 days a week, and I do it myself probably 2-3 days a week as well. And there's always that walk down going, I don't really want to do this. It is going to be cold when I get in. February, March, are the coldest months of the year in North Atlantic waters. So there is that element of, I don't want to do it. But once you dive in, that maybe first 3-4 seconds, you get your breath, and then I'm fine. And my point on it is that it's introducing a little bit of discomfort, which I think for me, I gain not just physically in terms of the benefits, but I think mentally as well, because I'm uncomfortable at least once a day, probably most days. And it doesn't have to be through that, but I do agree with you. I think there is an element of we have gotten soft mentally, compared to what previous generations had to navigate. And it's not to dismiss challenges and stuff that we all navigate, but I think relatively speaking, in terms of comfort and ease, different gravy, I think.
Yeah, and I think it inhibits then like our ability to thrive at some point, because if pain is the first kind of flashing signal that tells us to stop doing something, there's not many things in life that don't come with a healthy dose of pain. Like, being a parent, I'm not a parent yet, but I hopefully will be later this year. And, getting up every night and to feed a child, a crying child, or like even the glorious stuff that we consider in life, everything seems to be served up with a helping of like a gift, and then some degree of like a cost that comes with these processes as well. Just intrigued, just from that first, let's say, expedition, we'll call it, from a young lad from Limerick going up to Dublin. It must have felt like
Easy,
like quite
steady.
the expedition. No. I won't let this descend into nonsense. But just that feeling that, like, you were knackered, you were hungry, But you feel like that was probably the moment in which you kind of, I don't know, it felt like almost like you awoke something within you. Like, can you kind of describe could you elaborate more on the feeling of even just getting off or finishing off that journey or that first trip?
Yeah, I think, again, it's gone back a good few years now. God, as I think on it, like it's just shy of 30 years. Wow. It's gone back a while, but I guess I do remember just the level of you're knackered, you're spent. And in cycling, it's not just in cycling, it's a term often in the endurance world. People will talk about bonking. And, it's my experience. It's happened to me once or twice. People often say it'll happen to you once and it'll never happen to you again because it's so horrible. But you just feel like you've nothing, you've no energy. It's really hard to keep going. You just want to curl up and just not die, but just stop, and you want it to end. And I remember feeling a bit of that towards the end of it, but there was quite a bit of satisfaction when you get off the bike and you're wrecked, and you've the promise of a night ahead and a bit of crack with the lads and a few beers and all the rest of it. But there was that inner sense of that was cool. I did that. And it's not that I can't remember, but I'm sure we didn't. I'm sure I probably got slagged for the first hour of the evening, and that was it then. You eat it. Why didn't you just come up on the train or the bus or like the rest of us? But there was that sense of accomplishment. And I think it also got me, like a couple of years later, when I did my first sort of long trip across Australia on the bike, interestingly, my reference point when I looked at that, and it was about 5,500 kilometers, and I looked at it going, some of the days on that would have been 200 kilometers plus across certain parts of Australia, quite frankly, because there's nothing there. You're going from roadhouse to roadhouse. But my reference point around my belief in my ability to do that went back to this cycle. Because I thought, look, I've cycled 200 kilometers in a day. If it's 220, 230, 240, with a bit of prep, I'd be grand. So in some respects, that was a real tangible seed sown at that point in time. And sometimes there's a little bit of inner euphoria when you finish something like that. And sometimes it's just the shower feels that bit nicer and you appreciate it a bit more, or the cup of tea feels great, or the first beer, or whatever it is. It just, I think for me with some of this, I draw a real simple appreciation for the basic things that we have, and we're very lucky to have, here in where I am in Ireland, you are in Germany, but in lots, not everywhere, obviously, given what's going on in the world, but in lots of parts of the world.
And what was because I don't think I've ever asked you this, what was the motivation for the cycle across Australia? Like, could you paint the picture of what stage you were at in life that prompted you to do this? Where did the idea come from, and so on?
Yeah, I can remember very distinctly. I was traveling, so I was about 26, I think. And myself and two buddies had decided we'd go traveling around the world, go to Australia for a year, like, lots of other Irish people do. And we spent a couple of months traveling across America to begin with. And, from there we went to New Zealand, and then the plan was to head on to Australia. And it was when we were in New Zealand, my buddy Ray, was reading Lance Armstrong's first book. It's Not About the Bike. So I guess with the benefit of hindsight, it's
about the steroids and everything else.
Slightly unfortunate source of inspiration. But I remember I was like, he had finished it and he just tossed it back into the back seat of the car. And I think he just said, have a read of this. And when I read it, I guess I got inspired by the early stages of, going through cancer and what he did and getting himself back to where he did, albeit we know there's a lot more to it at this point.
Yeah, but still an unbelievable story, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, something in me sparked an urge. I want to do something to physically challenge myself. I want to do a long trip. I didn't know what it was at the time. And it was only a couple of weeks later when we were then living in Melbourne. It's probably a couple of months later, actually, when I got this notion of, God, I wonder would I cycle across Australia? And that was but the starting point was that initial seed from the book.
And just like that, I wonder will I cycle across Australia? And how long did that trip actually take you?
It took, it was bang on 60 days, but if, it's depending on the route people take. So I started in Perth. I sort of, when I looked it up online to see what's involved, who had done it, any advice you could pick up from people who've done it. I remember reading one guy's website who cycled Sydney to Perth. He said, next time I decide to cycle across a continent, maybe check the prevailing winds first. So the prevailing winds were more westerly when you get them. So I went Perth to Sydney, and I guess my route was down through Canberra. So maybe I added on a little bit more than what I needed to. But, I guess when I looked at it, I thought, right, it'll take maybe a month or two. I decided to use it as a tool to raise money for World Vision in Australia at the time. So it would have taken, I got knocked down twice by cars. So that probably added the last time. The first time was on day 4, and I had been struggling my knee. I was playing a season of rugby in Melbourne, and I was physically in good shape. I had trained, not a huge amount, but I trained a bit for the cycle. And, I was struggling with my knee. I think it was to do with the bike setup, and I got hit by a car. It was the longest day of the cycle. It was 240 kilometers. I was about 10 kilometers from the end of the day, and it was dark. So when you're cycling in darkness, you can see the trucks and the cars coming from behind you. You can see their lights in front of you. And some of these things, they're big road trains, they're big trucks. They were, it's not a big highway, and it's a 2-lane, 1 lane each side highway. And these were coming close. And anyway, trucks a ute sort of smashed his wing mirror off my elbow, and I went into the ditch. So I couldn't, right. I tried to leave that town. Like he looked, I remember the bang, I went into the ditch and I got up, and he heard a smack. And I'd say he saw me in the rear view mirror going off into the ditch. God love him. His hands were shaking when he came back. I think he probably thought he'd kill me. And he just said, look, throw the bike in the back of the truck. And I said, no, I'm doing this cycle across Australia. So, I've got to do it all myself. And he said, look, is there anything I can do? I feel bad. And I said, look, the bike is okay. But I had teamed up. I'd met Tori to come with me on the trip. And she was doing the fundraising. So Tori would do all the fundraising, and I was the one cycling. And I said, look, we're going to be raising money. Come down tomorrow. And our mode of raising money was to ask people to sponsor a child in Africa. And I said, come down tomorrow and sponsor a child. So I guilted him into that. And in fairness, he did. He came down to the stand and he did. But yeah, so that took, it added, I tried to leave, I think it was 3 times I tried to leave that town. It was Baladonia. And pain was just too much, and I had to give it. Like,
did you do serious damage to your elbow?
No, the elbow was fine. It was more, I think the knee, because I was clipped into the bike. I think the knee jarred a bit as I got hit. So the elbow was grand, just my knee was in ribbons. And in fairness, I got like a couple of local people helped with physio, and about a week or so, maybe 10 days later, I got going again.
And just out of interest, then, like you get knocked down 4 days into this trek across Australia. Like, does any part of you think, better to try another time, or were you just fixated on completing the task?
I was pretty fixated on it, but I remember thinking, like, that was up to that point, that was the most painful day physically of my life, because even before I got hit, I think it was every 15, 20 minutes, I had to pull over. The pain in my knee was so bad. So it was like each turn of the pedal, I was feeling a pain in the kneecap. And I thought to myself at the time, I consider myself relatively mentally strong. I thought, right, I can push through this. And I was shouting, I was screaming in the middle of nowhere. Like, if anyone saw me, they would have thought, like, what's this guy at? But I guess I was doing whatever I could to get through that day. And then, getting clobbered by the car didn't help. But I think I remember thinking, if this was the last or second last day, you could just grunt it out for the last couple of days. But I was like, I'm only 4 days into this. And when I tried to leave a couple of times, I got 40 minutes out, leaving the town, and I couldn't feel my knee. And I was like, okay, I need to get this right. So eventually, I didn't really think about, I'll do something else or abandon it. It was just like, okay, take the time I need and go again. But there was points later in the cycle where it flared up. And like, I remember a couple of times just cycling with one leg because I could leave the other leg just dangle because it was sore. and where it was flat, just use the one leg. And again, you were just so invested in it. And it was ironic because the more things went wrong, or as I said, when I got hit by the car, it was actually great for publicity in terms of getting coverage. So it was great to raise money for the charity. So it was actually, there was silver linings to it.
Jesus, that's taking reframing or a positive mindset to a new level. Paul, like when you think of doing that, like you're like the kind of the most grounded or like egoless psycho or sicko that I know. if you get me, like, do you get what I'm saying? Like you do things in some of these expeditions that, like, what do you like? Are you, because I always see you as like quite a, look, I know we all have our moments or whatever, but like you always strike me as a very kind of contented, like generous, giving kind of person, and very generally, like as I said in the intro, like you have a high level of enthusiasm for life as well, which I can find infectious. But like, what drive, like what's, are you trying to escape from something? Or like, what's driving you to try to cycle one-legged through what's already going to be, like, I'm sure, a tough enough kind of endurance task? Like, what do you think is driving you at times?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think I share a story with you. I remember before we went to do the Northwest Passage trip this is when we were living in Canada, and obviously where we met. I was going out, I was seeing a girl, and we were only seeing each other for I think a couple of months, and she was nice and all the rest of it, but I was mad keen into this, and I just said, look, this is going to take up more of my time, and we so we broke up. I remember she said, she was like, what are you running from with all these trips?
Yeah.
And, I sort of assured her, look, I'm not running from you. But what I've realized over the years is that I just I love testing myself, in this sort of environment. And it's not like I'm certainly not doing it to prove something to somebody else. I love the crack and the adventure of, God, I wonder, could I cycle across Australia, or could I do some of the other things? And I get enthused by it. But I think one of the reasons I get enthused by it is I don't know if I read this somewhere or if this just sort of came to me years ago, but I'd hate to ever meet the person I could have been. So let's say 10, 20, 30 years from now, I bump into someone at a party or whatever it might be, and we're chatting away, and they lived their life in a certain way, or they had certain experiences. And I hate to ever meet that person and go, God, I would have liked to have done something like that. But maybe I didn't because I was afraid, or I was worried about what people think. So for me, it's about living the life that I want to live and that I feel energized to live. And as I said, I didn't start out this way. That a lot of the benefit I've gotten from these trips, I've gained, I think, so much interesting insight into my own mind, into what I would say just into the human mind that you can't get from reading about it. I think when you experience things, you obviously somatically you feel it, but you embody it that little bit more. And I think the learning becomes more relevant and real. So that's been a big benefit of this. But the short answer to your question is just, I still love doing it. And I love what I learn about myself. And obviously you get to see parts of the world that you wouldn't maybe necessarily go and see. That makes sense.
And you get lots of like helpful publicity after being knocked down and the likes. In terms then of the trip to Australia, the cycle across Australia, if you could break down what you felt you learned about yourself through that process, what comes to mind?
I think the first thing was, I probably wasn't using this language at the time, but I think the first thing was just not worrying as much about what other people think. So let me just list off a few things, and I can sort of go back to maybe one or two of them. So I think one was just the importance of just having a go and saying, feck it, I'm going to try and do this. I don't care if someone says I'm nuts or I'm an idiot or whatever. I think there's a lot of value to that. And I think the more I've done it in my life, when someone says you're nuts or you're crazy, the more I realize, oh, I'm probably onto something here.
Yeah.
So I think that was one lesson, just have a go. I think the second one is I realized how powerful our minds are, because I'm no, elite cyclist. I'm no elite athlete. I realized through what I experienced on that, our mind is so much more capable, and we're so much more capable than what we give ourselves credit for. That was a big thing for me. And I also, I guess the third thing was, like, just, maybe it's related to the first thing, is don't waste your life not living what you want to do. Like, go after whatever dream or ambition you have. And it doesn't need to be, I want to accomplish something. A dream or an ambition could be, I want to live in a slightly different way, whatever it might be. That came home loud and clear. To go back maybe to the mind piece, like I remember the last day of the cycle, and this was probably an easy one to identify, but so I'm coming into Sydney, because we'd gotten a bit of exposure, we'd raised quite a bit of money, and there was a couple of television crews. The plan was we started in Bledisloe Beach in Perth, Cottesloe Beach, and started there. So it was literally, I went in for a swim, got my bike, off I went, and the plan was to get to the East Coast, finish in Bondi, into the water. So we're about 10 kilometres in the finish, and I'm in it's a 3-lane highway coming into Sydney called the Princess Highway. And I hear this, it's obviously busy. I'm over at the side, out of the way as much as I can be. And I hear this screech of car brakes behind me. And if you imagine you're sitting on your bike, and I sort of looked over, and it was my right shoulder, just to see what the screech was. But as I probably didn't even get my head fully across, I start going over the handlebars. So the screech was a car hitting me from behind, and I went over the handlebars onto the ground. And I sort of woke up. I don't know if I was knocked out. My helmet wasn't broken, but I woke up on the ground. There's people around me, and my knee and stuff was cut, and a few scrapes and a little bit of blood, but nothing major. So I sort of got up, and like the back wheel was smashed in, it was crunched in, the bike was toast. And I didn't realize when my hand was broken. Like I've broken lots of bones, and
Right.
anyone who's listening, or you might know as well, if you break a bone, sometimes the adrenaline that's flowing, the swelling doesn't come up maybe initially. You go, oh, I don't know, that's sore, but I keep going. So I rang the PR lady from World Vision, because she'd flown in from Melbourne that day, and I rang Tori. They were both sort of close to the finish. And I said, look, I'm after getting hit. I'm grand. But Tori, if you can come out to where I am, throw the bike in the boot. I said, I'll run the last 10 kilometres, because I don't want this to finish on the side of a highway. So there was that a sense of completion. And I was sore, but I remember running into Bondi, and there was a few friends there, nothing major, but people I knew maybe in Australia. And the bike was just crunched. So it was sort of like, no, Paul, you can't run these last 10K. So, this PR, I think I started running. She said, no, come back. I'm going to get you a bike. So she went into a bike shop, and as, she told them the story, and one of them had heard an interview I did in the radio that morning, said, look, here's a bike. There's no charge. Just bring it back tomorrow. So she gives me this bike, but the bike is like, I'm not that tall. I don't know what I'm 5'8", 5'9" if I'm pushing it. But I'm on this bike, and it's too small for me. So it looks like I've stolen like my little brother's bike, and I'm cycling into Bondi Beach in this thing. I could just see a couple of people going, did you go across Australia on that joke?
Yeah.
But I guess that was, again, to me, it was an example for me personally of just like when your mind gets into a place of this is happening. Sometimes there can be consequences if you push your body too hard, and you might suffer the consequences later, and they might be short term or slightly longer term. But that was for me a big thing. Just I didn't even understand the mind probably, but I was just that concept of, whoa, there's a whole stratosphere here that I can tap into that I haven't even begun to tap into.
So I'm not saying that you're chasing a high from these experiences, but it's almost the high you get from moments where you've hit your potential, or you've, like, not to say you've maxed out or something like that, but you almost feel like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of what you're capable of.
Yeah, sometimes there's those moments, but then sometimes, again, this might change for me. I can't speak for anyone else as you get older. Like, I know adventure and an adventurous spirit is part of who I am. It's not all of who I am, but it's a part of me. And that adventurous spirit can be expressed in lots of different ways. But I've just got a flashback of something. I'll come back to that. But that adventurous spirit can come out. And so for me, being in nature, like last year, the climb Mont Blanc in France, that's not something necessarily that brought me to my edge.
Right.
But it was something, just the experience of being out in nature and experiencing what it's like to do something like that, whether it's climb a mountain or go rowing or whatever it might be. I think that's part of it. For me, it's not about accomplishing something, but it's also about how do I want to experience the whole journey of getting ready to do something and the planning of it and trying to figure it out and the training and all of these ingredients that go in. It's not just about, I emptied myself on that or I got to the other side of Australia. It's more like one of the most prized possessions I have is a little book I brought with me when I did the cycle. Not one of the most prized possessions, but something really nice to have. It's an A4 sort of scrapbook, and I just called it The Thoughts of a Nation. And as I went across Australia, if I met people, I met loads of people, I'd just write down whatever's in your head today or whatever's going on. And the comments and stuff in that are priceless. That's the type of stuff you just, you have all this treasure chest of stories of experience that you just wouldn't have otherwise. So it's very much the journey piece as well as maybe what I learn about the mind. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So that sounds like there's a number of things going on. So, you talk about finding out things about yourself, finding out things about the mind. There is some sense of what am I capable of? That's in relation with the mind as well. Then there's almost this part where it sounds like this is just an expression of who you are. This is you, your soul almost presenting itself, manifesting itself on the outside. It's an expression of who you are in a very innate way. And then just this sense of it's a life, the satisfaction of when I do these things, it's a life well lived.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And sometimes I think you can, I think sometimes we can, again, I know this is a generalization, but sometimes we can try and overanalyze things. And sometimes it's just you know what, I just want to do it and it feels right. And sort of off you go.
When you're talking here, man, I already feel like a pang to go out and climb a mountain or something. I think I've been neglecting it a bit in my own self since I moved to Berlin. But I think there almost seems like something quite primitive that you're tapping into, that this is just the place where we're supposed to be sometimes. And if we go back even to the start of just how comfortable we are, and the things that we prioritize over getting out in nature. And this doesn't have to be about climbing Mont Blanc. It could just be going for a walk up your local mountain or a hill. That isn't even going to exert you, but just that immersion with yourself outside of all these distractions we have that usually leads us to a kind of a better place, mentally, physically, physiologically, whatever. Just wanted to move it on to the expedition that always blew my mind when we first met. When you told me that you rowed across the Atlantic, I didn't know what to make of that when I first heard it. And then I asked you, were you a professional rower or something like this? And I think if I recall correctly, you kind of said no, you just were kind of playing around with it for a few months before you decide to row across the Atlantic Ocean. Is that correct? Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, it's probably, I can't remember the conversation exactly, but it's probably, I might have underplayed it a tiny bit, but no, in some respects, sorry, a lot of truth there in what you said, that I wasn't a rower. But I do remember at the time contacting the only people in Ireland who'd ever done it, Eamon and Peter Kavanagh, and they had rowed across the Atlantic, I think 7 or 8 years previously. I remember the first time I met Eamon, he did say to me, I said, Eamon, am I crazy? To do this or to think I could do it. And he said to me, he said, Paul, trying to row across the Atlantic has nothing got to do with how good a rower you are. And it's also nothing got to do with how much ocean experience you are. It's going to be everything got to do with how mentally tough you are. And I remember sort of laughing internally to myself. I was like, well, just as well because I can't row and no ocean experience. Don't think he saw the funny side of that comment. But he was absolutely right. And I remember doing a talk. It was actually in the Vancouver Rowing Club. And as the words came out of my mouth, I remember realizing I'm actually insulting so many people here. Because the words that came out of my mouth were, rowing isn't that hard. Anyone can learn how to do it.
Right.
So to learn how to row and an ocean's a great leveler. So like if you're an Olympic level rower and I'm me, it's not to say that the ocean is going to equalize us, but your years of experience, your technique, your fitness, all that stuff, you won't get a chance to get the benefit of that when you've waves knocking around and it's hard to catch an oar. There's obviously still going to be a difference between us. I think that was, it was a friend of mine who I was in school with. It was his idea. Started to look into it. And before I knew it, I was just enthralled by the idea of it. And I think there was one of the great lessons for me with this is there was a lovely naivety because I knew nothing about rowing or ocean rowing or what was involved in rowing across an ocean. And it was two really important things. When I think about it now, I learned from that. One is there's a lot to be said for naivety. Because if someone had told me everything we'd have to go through just to get to the start line, let alone actually attempt the crossing, there's probably a reasonable chance I might have said, you know what? No, I'm good. I remember a couple of years after, my girlfriend, now my wife, Colette, said that a friend of hers we wrote a book about the crossing and she read the book and before she read it, she was thinking about, I'd like to row an ocean. And then after she read it, she was like, nah, not a chance, which is fair enough. But so the naivety, I think, so much to be said about it. And the second thing is be really careful who you listen to, because most people in my world, and I understood it, said, Paul, you're absolutely bonkers. You're going to get yourself killed. But they knew nothing about rowing. They knew nothing about what it took to row an ocean. And my lesson from it was listen to people who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to what you're considering, whatever it might be. And you could sort of widen that out. And I sort of refer to it now as guard your airspace. Just be careful who or what we allow into our airspace, because it can be destructive, it can be unhelpful, it can be annoying. And then you go to the other extreme, it can be really helpful in terms of who you listen to.
And I think that's so important, man, because so many people aren't doing things that kind of extend the realm of their possibilities, if you know what I mean. Or like, I know even with clients that you may have or clients that I have, sometimes when some people tell me that they're doing everything right in their life, but they don't feel great. And I'm kind of like, how can you say you're doing everything right in your life and you don't feel great? Like, do you know what I mean? From the point of view of you're following someone else's plan for what life should be. And I think we can be so heavily influenced by what the correct, without knowing what the process is, just by probability or just by somebody else's thoughts. And you don't know what kind of mood they're in, what they're carrying, what their perspectives are in life, if they match up with yours or not. So I think that's such a nice point about just protect your airspace almost in terms of who you let in to affect what you're deciding to do.
Yeah.
But man, there's cycling across Australia, right? Which, even I like a bit of a cycle here and there. Like, I'm kind of like, I'd probably be the weather that would scare me more about that, not even the distance as much. But man, I don't know. I don't think you could pay me to even contemplate or to even start like to row around the Irish Sea or something like that. So, and I understand what you're saying. Like, it's a great thing that you didn't know what was coming, if there was a naivety that kind of protected you a little bit in that. But were you not, when you were contemplating this, like, was there a part of you that was like petrified?
It's a good question. I probably wasn't petrified. I was probably nervous. The more obviously you prep for something like this, the more you look into it and you realize, okay, there's certain risks. There's certain things you can do to mitigate the risks. So I think I wasn't. I remember actually, it's probably a good way to illustrate it. The night before, so we were we started in the Canary Islands, finished in Antigua in the Caribbean. So it's about 2,500 miles across. And the night before the race was due to leave, it ended up getting put back 3 days because of a storm front that was moving in, and the danger was that storm will just basically push the boats won't get a chance to clear the islands, get pushed back in the rocks. So it was postponed 3 days. But Eamon and Peter, who had really, like, they had taken us under their wing, they lent us their boat to use. They'd been incredible to us it was probably about a year, 18 months of prepping for it. And we were out they came out to the Canaries to wish us off, and we were out for dinner with them. And I remember Peter said to me towards the end of dinner, he said, can I ask you, are you afraid? Because you seem very relaxed. And I can't remember what Tori said. I can remember my own response was, no, like I'm excited because we've spent nearly 2 years getting ready for this. And it's been such a journey just to get to this point. I couldn't wait to get going. Right. But I definitely felt a sense of intrepidation and nervousness as well, because I had no idea what the ocean was going to throw at you. And with something like that, you can't prepare for it, really. It's hard. You can prepare for it, but you'll never experience 10, 20, 30, 40 foot swell until you're out in an ocean. You can row along the Irish Sea as much as you want, but you're not going to get that. So there's only so far your prep physically and mentally can take you. You've got to part of your prep will actually be doing it and the experience you build up as you're going. So I was definitely nervous, but I don't remember being, at least at the start, sort of petrified. But I was definitely aware of, look, people have died obviously doing this. So it wasn't lost on me. But it was probably easier for me in the sense of, I was doing it with my girlfriend at the time. We didn't have any kids.
So we'll both die together, or?
I guess I didn't have to navigate. Obviously, I had my family in terms of the dynamics there and being away for so long and the risk and everything that went with that. I guess I didn't have to navigate that. It wasn't like I was married or I had kids that I was leaving and taking all that on. So I was fortunate, I think, of the time of life or where I was in my life helped, or put it this way, it didn't hinder it.
And just like I asked with the cycle across Australia, like, can you give me a sense of, like, I know you heard about this and you were intrigued by it, but even stage in your life, what was, like, do you think that anything that was happening in your life led to it happening, this being the thing that you did, or, it also being the timing in which you did this, if you get me? Like, was your life getting too comfortable, or like, what kind of sparks these ideas in you?
Yeah, I think there was an element. Again, a lot of this, I wasn't aware of it necessarily at the time. So I had spent probably 2 years away traveling and living in Australia, doing the cycle. Came back to Ireland. Tori and I were together as a couple, and I was there for about a year and a half, and I was struggling. I felt there was something in me that it was lovely to be home, but I wasn't fitting in. There was something that just wasn't quite right. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, there was more, because I had so many, I guess, adventures and stuff over the last couple of years. I think that beast wanted to be fed some more, maybe before he was happy to put his feet up for a little bit. No, I wasn't aware of this. So I think I was searching for something. Like, I remember in my job that I was doing at the time, some of the guys I worked with, I'm still good friends with. I remember my boss, because when I talk, I often, my hands are moving. And of course, I was out rowing every week, and like most Monday mornings, I come into our Monday morning meeting, like blisters or, calluses and stuff in my hands. And I remember at one point, Mark looked at me and was like, what the hell did you do to yourself? And I hadn't told him yet. I was going to give him 6 months notice, but it just came out then, like, and it's like, right, that's sort of a bit weird, but I can't remember his exact words. But I remember even at that point, I wanted to finish really well. So I wanted to leave that job knowing that the door, like, I was going to resign. It was a sales role, and I knew I'd be gone for probably at least 3-4 months. So the easiest thing was just resign. But, they did offer me a job when I came back, but I wanted to leave on the best possible terms, which probably made me even work harder to leave on those terms. And so I wasn't leaving. It wasn't that I enjoyed what I did. I was in a good relationship. Definitely the whole process of trying to put that trip together, like, I put myself into a lot of debt to make it happen. And, it was hugely challenging to get to the start line, let alone do the actual row.
So that kind of makes sense though when you're, the night before and you're chatting to the two lads that have done it before and they're talking about are you afraid? And of course you're saying there's some trepidation, but it seems like there was a huge amount of work that just, and risk, you could say, like, right, giving up a job, going into debt just to fulfill this, kind of feed the beast as you say it. So I can just imagine then, like, everything, all the obstacles are out of the way and now it's just you and
Exactly.
the ocean.
Yeah. It's like life became simpler. It was like, are we safe? Have we food? Have we water? Are we making a bit of progress? And I think that's another, I guess, gift that I've gotten from these experiences is just the appreciation of the simple things in life. And I've realized as well that lots of people aren't necessarily comfortable with embracing uncertainty. And there'll be varying degrees on this. Some people will love change and love uncertainty. Others will hate it and everything in between. And the nature of the uncertainty and everything can obviously contribute to it. But the reason I bring it up was I see now, I remember after the row, I was doing a talk, I was like an after dinner talk, and I was chatting to a few people afterwards, and this girl came up and sat beside me at the table, and she was asking me lots of questions, and she was like, I'm thinking about not rowing the Atlantic, but doing something that taken off. And she was like, so did you had your job safe when you came back? And I said, no, I said, I resigned from my job. And she said, but did you have money put aside and stuff? And I said, no, I was 40 odd grand in debt. And she said, but like, you knew you could pay it back. I said, I hadn't a clue I was going to pay it. I said, what are you really asking me here? And my impression, albeit it was just a 5-10 minute chat with this lady, but my impression was she wanted to do her equivalent of this, but was uncomfortable with the risks that come with it. And I see it's people's ability to tolerate emotional discomfort often stop them doing things that they say they want. Sometimes they actually don't really want to, and they might realize they don't want to, and that's fine. But I think it's that ability there is really important.
Because I think often I talk to people, and even just friends, even around there, saying, "I don't know what I don't necessarily know what I want to do with my life." And we just, through a series of conversations, we kind of becomes clear that they know what they want to do with in their life. They just don't want to pay the toll, or they don't want to pay the cost for it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty big distinction, in this world where people are saying, and look, the idea of purpose is glamorized anyway, like almost the way people are selling it is, if find your purpose and the universe just opens every door for you, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big difference between knowing what you want to do and just be willing to pay the cost or at least the initial upfront sacrifice of what's required.
Yeah, totally.
Paul, I know when I interviewed you, because Paul took part in the initial interviews as well for the What is a Good Life newsletter, and you gave this amazing story almost of, you're out underneath the boat cleaning the barnacles off it. I don't know if even that's the right expression, but the boat kind of shifts in the waves. It hits you in the face. So a few drops of blood come out. You realize it's a Tuesday morning and you're just like, God, this is living. Like, I could be in the office right now, but I'm hanging off the side of this boat in the middle of the Atlantic. And it always just stuck with me as just a really beautiful kind of image and story. Are there other kind of seminal moments as you rowed across the Atlantic? Maybe if you can give us an example of whether something that ties in with like feeling fear, something that ties in with just sheer exuberance, or and just kind of anything in between.
God, yeah, there's probably lots of different things. Like if I think about fear, I remember, so we did this, it was part of a race. So 26 boats in it, all from different parts of the world. Within the first day or two, you don't see anyone else because everyone's, if I'm going a quarter of a mile faster than you, in a couple of hours I'll be out of sight type of thing. And everyone's going, and maybe somebody might say, oh, we're going to take this heading, that's where we're going to head for that. So you'd lose track of people. So it was a funny race in that you were all around each other at the start, but then we saw one boat after 60 days and that was it. But I remember one night, we got a text message on our satellite phone that the other Irish team in the race had gone down. And if your boat goes down or comes apart or you get into trouble, you'll set off what's called an EPIRB, which is a distress signal. And that'll send a signal out to a couple of 100 square miles radius and other ships can pick it up. So we had gotten this, and it was a wild night. It was really rough. Some of the conditions might seem rough at the start, but you got used to them. So it's amazing what you can acclimatize to as you get comfortable in bad conditions. But I remember this night in particular, it was dark, it was moonless, there was swell coming from every side. I could barely see. We had a compass in front of us, which would show where you're going, little light over the compass. I could barely see it, like it was raining and stuff coming into my eyes. And it was wild. I remember that particular night thinking, it was one of the few nights where we said, let's batten down the hatches. We didn't know what had happened to the guys. They nearly got killed. They did survive. But I remember that night being in the cabin and getting thrown, the boat's getting knocked around all over the place. We didn't capsize, but my dad rang. Now, what I didn't realize is there was a report on the news at home about the two guys going down.
Right.
He had seen that and was obviously going, oh shit, is that my son? And so he rang me, but he didn't tell me about that. And I didn't tell him about the lads going down either. So I was like, literally, it was like I was in what I imagine it might feel like if you're in a washing machine. And I was there with the big clunky sat phone up to my ear. And how's mom? Oh yeah, good. And I'm trying to make just to basically put him at ease. Things are good. Yeah, it's been raining tonight. What was that? Oh, sorry, I just slipped. And like it was pure. If I had videoed it, it would have been pure comedy, I think. But that was one moment where I remember going, can we just get through tonight? That was a fearful moment. Where I just wasn't sure. It was just wild. And then you had moments of, there was moments where I know this is towards the end, there's lots of things throughout the way, but one of them was 27 miles from land where we saw land. So we knew 20, 30 miles out we might see land. And about 700 miles earlier, we were getting pushed really far south. And at that point, we thought, geez, we're going to end up in fucking Venezuela at this stage. But if that's what happens, so be it. We'll still get across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
But we obviously wanted to arrive to Antigua. And we got a little bit lucky with the weather. We sort of fought really hard to fight our way back up north. So we were on a good heading, a good latitude coming into Antigua. So we knew we were going to make it, bar any last minute disaster. And the weather was calm and it was warm. And I remember seeing Antigua, and it was like a little pillow on the horizon. And I remember sort of shouting at Tori, land, look. Like for nearly, this was our 85th day out there. So for the guts of 3 months, you would sort of dreamt of what it'd be like for this moment. And she didn't believe me. And I was like, get up, look, it's there. And like, there was that moment of a little bit of disbelief, a little bit of, oh my God, isn't that so beautiful? And then there was so many different emotions there, but it was just going, wow, like we're going to do this. So like there were some incredible moments like that along the way, or when you rode through the night and you've the sun coming up in front of you and, you've flying fish coming across the boat. Like there was some amazing moments like that.
Paul, what the hell was it like? Like, when you saw land, did you cry? Did you break into kind of hysterical laughter? I'm just trying to imagine if I haven't seen land, like, it's kind of even hard to try to imagine not seeing land for 85 days, let alone go through like, an experience of being in a tumble dryer, hearing another Irish team went down, the inherent danger within it. Like what were the kind of emotional reactions to it when you saw like land ahead?
Yeah, it was probably elation, joy. And I also remember a little bit of sadness that this was coming to an end, because maybe hindsight is easy. Like when you look back on, so at the time, like if I looked back on the previous 80 odd days and, some of them, there's no way I'd want to experience them again per se. But you look back at some of the good ones and I was sad at the simplicity of life that we were living right then was coming to an end. Food, water, appreciate what's around you. Just, the thrill of being in something like this, that at that point you knew, bar us doing something stupid, we should make it. So there was all those different emotions. But then as we rode through the night, because we made land we actually stopped for a couple of hours because my parents were flying in, my sister and my aunt Irene was flying in, and Tori's family and her brother were flying in. So that was even very hard to sort of coordinate if they're trying to book flights and you're like, I think we might be 2 more weeks, but we don't know. So,
Right.
So, and we wanted to come in daylight as opposed to the middle of the night. So I think we stopped for about 6 hours, just let the boat sort of, float, and cleaned up the boat. We probably cleaned up ourselves a bit, just chilled out, enjoyed the sun. And then we started rowing then the last 24 hours in through the night. And it was a weird feeling because when you're out at sea, I remember seeing Guadeloupe is to the south of Antigua. I remember seeing the lights from Guadeloupe first, and it was like a torch, coming over the horizon, that sort of light. And then as you got closer, you could see the little dotted lights. And then Antigua, we could see that and see the dotted lights. But we had little handheld GPS, and you see the outline of the cliffs. So we were sort of going to hit a point, and we could sort of go around a little bit of the island into English Harbour where we finished. But you see the outline of the cliff against the sky. And I was looking at this going, I think we're like on top of it. We're going to hit it. But then you look at your GPS, 10 miles to go or 5 miles to go. And I really had to believe what I was looking at. And then as the sun comes up and you see your parents and your family, like it's an amazing feeling. It's something it'll always, so many of those details will stay with me forever. It's a really special time.
What was it like embracing your family when you got off the boat?
It was cool. It was, it's the only video footage we have from the trip is coming into Antigua. And I remember, because it's actually coming up in a week, the 23rd of February is the day that we finished. I always remember that date. But when I stepped off the boat, both Tori and I, we both wobbled quite a bit because we didn't have our land legs. We were used to being at sea for so long. I remember my mom was the first person who came up and we didn't know exactly, you could sort of pick, there's a few people there. And she just gave me a big hug, and it was like such a lovely hug with the words. She just said to me, don't ever do this again. Then my dad came in and my sister, and it was magic. Like that whole morning of, having fresh food and just sitting there and having a bit of comfort and just nothing to do. It wasn't like, right, 2 hours time, I got to go rowing again. Like it was lovely. It couldn't have worked out nicer, in terms of the finish.
And look, I know there's things you've done, like whether it's an expedition in the Arctic or the rowing again in the Northwest Passage. And for anyone's listening, I may have a link for Paul's new newsletter soon, and it'll also be kind of you're in the midst, Paul, of writing a book, Unbound, building an expedition mindset, which I'm really excited to read as well. So I know there's other expeditions you've done, but are there future? Is there anything is there any way in which you're trying to feed the beast in the future? Is there anything that's coming up?
Yeah, I think there's always things. It's funny. I don't really necessarily. This year, interestingly, is the first year where I've probably gone looking for it a little bit more. It's tended to sort of organically happen. So I've sort of pulled myself back from, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do this. So we've myself and my wife, we've 2 young kids. They're nearly 4 and nearly 2. And Colette's amazing because she gets this as part of me. And I remember when we got married, friends and family just sort of mess. That's the end of these adventures now, And in fairness, she was like, no, this is part of the beast, part of the man I'm marrying. So she's brilliant. She would say to me the last couple of years, look, take a week, you can manage that with some family support with the kids, knock yourself out, go in and do whatever you want. Just, keep it around that sort of time frame. So, I'm not sure yet, for this summer, but I'm trusting my instinct. I'm going away this weekend overnight doing sort of a bushcraft course where you stay out for a night, you build your own shelter. Like I know bits about that anyway, but there's stuff around foraging and lighting fires or wet wood and stuff. So I've got a feeling that the week in July will involve something that's a bit more backcountry and sort of raw. So I'll see, but I just sort of trust it's going to appear. I know what it is.
Paul, just in terms, and I'm asking this even for me, rather than anyone listening.
Yeah.
What advice, What advice would you give to people just to start to cultivate this a little bit more? Because there is something as you're talking, that does kind of, look, you know me well. I take risks in other ways. I've traveled the world too, and I'm starting in new directions in careers, and I've maybe these spiritual or philosophical things that I explore with or whatever. But there's definitely, in listening to you, I don't know, evoked something in me or stoked something up. Like, and look, I'm not going to row across the Atlantic. That's not a goal of mine. But what kind of advice would you have for people just to start building towards something in terms of this? Like,
in terms of like something,
like maybe just taking on some degree of, sorry, I didn't finish that really. Taking on some degree of more adventure in their life, and I mean this almost in a physical sense, like you know what I mean, not just in maybe a career or something like that. Because I do think you've tapped, when you're talking, I think there's something quite like almost primordial about this, if you know what I mean, that I think you're probably experiencing a different frequency or a different joy in life with what you're engaging in.
Yeah, totally. I think you've struck on something that resonates quite a bit with me, that I think we are tapping into something that's a bit more primal when you're out in nature, when you're maybe building your own fire, whether you don't have to be building your own fire, but when you're engaged in something that physically is, you're investing in it, you don't have to be emptying yourself, but you're doing so. I think there's something really primal. I remember last year bringing, different people out sort of wild camping and doing different trips like that, and sitting around a campfire that you've built yourself and chatting away. There's something just, it's like nearly there's a part, if you think of us ancestrally, like we've done this before, if I go back generations, my ancestors did this. So at a cellular level, there's some of that in me. There's some of that in all of us. So I think it's, especially now when I think as a man, there's, the landscape has shifted in terms of how people maybe view themselves. And I think there's something really good. Embrace that manliness that's in you in terms of expressing yourself and being out doing some of these things. I think it's very, very healthy. But I guess to answer your question, I think the first thing I'd say is be playful and be curious. So if there's something in you going, I wouldn't mind getting my teeth into something, it might be trying a few different things. So it might be sort of what I'd call merely finding your arena, whether it's hiking out in nature, whether it's cycling, whether it's indoor climbing, whether it's running, whether it's swimming, whatever it might be, is from a physical perspective, is just play around and go, God, I really enjoy this. Like I love climbing, and I'm not any expert climber at all. But I just love doing that. So that will probably inform future trips or experiences that I have. I've done loads of cycling at the moment. Just in the last 6 months, I'm less drawn to cycling. So I think it's be playful with something that you might like to do. The second thing then is I think there can be a commitment piece where I think it's healthy and it can be really helpful for someone to commit to, say if it was cycling as an example, and someone says, right, I think I wouldn't mind doing something like this. I'm going to put a date in the diary where maybe I enter a 50k or 100k, not a race per se, but a cycle day. So I think sometimes when you have something to work towards, it gets you off your arse, if I'm being honest. And I think it gets you sort of motoring. And I think part of where I am now with this is that if I'm thinking of something, I think about a few criteria. So is it something I want to do that I think physically and mentally, emotionally really, really push me? Is it something I want to do where I need to acquire a skill? So is it climbing? Is it kayaking? Is it mountain biking? Whatever it might be, where you can't necessarily just, I'll go off and do that. So anyone can get up on the bike and go on cycling. You can't necessarily go climbing. You got to still learn a skill. So think about that. Is it a skill there? Is it something that is going to sort of really challenge me, that I'm going to have to be really fit for? Is it something where I'm sort of off the grid? So I'm really deep in nature somewhere. So those sort of three things I think about. And maybe the fourth thing is, is it something you'd like to experience with mates or a partner, or actually it's something I'd love to do my own. So those couple of things can help just to get a few ideas. But I go back to the just be playful and just get going doing something, and you'll find your
I really like that, because I think once anyone starts to just open up the possibility, even just or to be curious or even to experiment, it's kind of a domino effect. One thing leads to the next thing, and you can't map it all out from the very start. It's just 100%. Literally trying something new at the start. It doesn't
absolutely.
And of course, then when it materializes or becomes a little bit clearer, then at that point, then you can start to make plans as well, and then put that commitment piece in as well. But just basically to start.
Exactly.
I shall keep you posted on whatever I try in the coming weeks, Paul.
There'll be more chats going on here.
Yeah.
I'll be texting you. Mark, like, what are you thinking of? What are you thinking? Tell me.
Yeah. I took the dog for a walk, Paul. No, but Paul, just coming up to the end here now, and as I tend to do, I ask people what their thoughts on a good life is for them. I know during the course of this conversation, just from some of the notes I've been taking as you've been talking, like not worrying about what other people think, finding your potential, doing things that make you uncomfortable, appreciating the small things in life, just when you're mentioning being on the boat and just the simplicity of the life that you had, getting out in nature, handling uncertainty, almost listening to that voice inside of you, like feeding the beast or, expressing your soul. So I think you've been touching on various elements that I think will be important to you, but just to get your final thoughts on what is a good life for you, Paul.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I sort of knew we'd probably get to that point today. I was thinking back to the chat we had last year. I think it was last year. And I don't think it's changed dramatically for me. I think of the way I sort of view it is that each one of us has a very unique soul. We have a spirit, we have an energy in us that is unique to me. It's unique to you, Mark. It's unique to everybody. And my belief is that there's different things. There's an energy to this spirit, and it might be playful, it might be curious, it might be adventurous, it might be thoughtful, whatever it might be. We all have that in us. And for me, what a good life is that if my soul and the essence of who I am is in the driving seat of the car for my journey through life, that to me, it's like nearly you can't go wrong. It doesn't mean things won't go wrong. Of course, like things will go sideways and shit happens. But I think if I'm doing that, I'm following a path in life that when I get to the end of it, going back to something I said earlier, and when at some point, if I'm doing my exit interview, if you and I were chatting and if I knew I was going to pop my clogs tomorrow and we had a chat about, how I lived and what I did, and I guess I want to get to that point and go, do you know what? I get this one a good rattle. And did things go sideways? Did I make mistakes? Of course I did. That's life. But I didn't allow fear or emotional attachment to what people think or different things like that. It doesn't mean I don't experience them. Of course I do. I'm human. But there's a difference between experiencing fear and being courageous. It's not that you don't feel fear. Of course you do.
Yeah.
So I think that for me, a good life is going, did I do that? And now I guess in the last couple of years for me is did I, as part of that did I give all I can give to my wife and kids? So as they embark on my kids embark on their journey through life, did I play my part to set them up as best I can in terms of them as human beings, as people? And my hope for them is that they'll embrace the essence of who they are. And it's not like it's a yes or no. It's not a binary thing. There'll be moments where we make decisions that maybe we go a little bit away from ourselves and moments where we come back. And I think that's a constant. I was talking to Glenn about this recently. That's a constant flux, I think, that we have. But by and large, if my soul is taking me north, it doesn't really matter if I go that road or that road or that road, but am I moving in that direction of, this is good. That to me is a good life. And it's a life where, hopefully I won't look back. I remember talking to someone years ago saying that, look, I probably need 10 lifetimes to do everything I want to do. So just choose wisely. But hopefully I don't look back and go, you muppet, why didn't you try that or give that a go?
Yeah. But I really enjoy your perspectives in general, but I really enjoy this answer that you've kind of remained consistent with as well since we talked in those kind of anonymous and private interviews. And I must say some of the things you describe at times, I'd almost think like if I heard them from anyone else, I'd be like, Jesus, like relax with this kind of positive attitude or this things. But like the thing that I enjoy so much about listening to you, Paul, is that you live and you breathe it. And it's, I don't know, it's very apparent in how you show up to life. And I love this idea of how you describe as well that, you know, you'd almost be driven by the potential regret of meeting the man that you could have been and kind of shaking your head at what could have been. And, you know, even the sentiment again there of, yes, okay, look, there's a nice realism to the way you describe kind of going after your dreams too. Yes, it can mean that things can go sideways or that you'll make mistakes. It's not about all this kind of doing the right thing all the time and being perfect. It's just about going out and living life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's certain aspects to it, even just in listening to you. You're not going to have the perfect circumstances every time to go out and live your life. The universe, the world isn't going to give you this perfectly gift-wrapped opportunity in which it all just is there for you. Sometimes it may do, and you know we have these lucky moments of things falling into place, but by and large it's not. And just to kind of accept that at times you may have to sacrifice something for the thing that you want. It may scare you. You may have to deal with uncertainty, as you've touched on a number of times, but it's worth it almost just for the sake of that feeling of like aliveness that I think you embody so well, Paul. So look, man, appreciate that. Thank you very much for the time today, Paul. Thank you very much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast, and I look forward to chatting again soon, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks a million, Mark, and well done, and well done on what you're doing, and thank you for it.